The endocrine system is a collection of glands scattered throughout the body that helps control body function. You'll remember the nervous system was also a controlling system, so let's see how these two compare. The nervous system is a very fast-acting system. It acts instantaneously to a stimulus, and it acts very quickly, and it's over with in a hurry. The nervous system relies on chemical messengers known as neurotransmitters to tell the cells what to do. The target cells are very close to the site of the neurotransmitter release. A target cell is simply a cell that has a receptor for the neurotransmitter. Because it has a receptor for the neurotransmitter, it will be affected by the neurotransmitter. The endocrine system, on the other hand, is rather slow to act. It takes minutes to hours for it to respond to a stimulus, and once it gets started, the effects last much longer. It too relies on chemical messengers. These chemical messengers are known as hormones. Many of the hormones are also neurotransmitters. So what makes them different? A neurotransmitter is manufactured by a nerve cell. A hormone is manufactured by an endocrine cell. The effects of the neurotransmitter and the hormone may be the same on the target cell, but they come from different cells in the body. The target cells for the endocrine system are very far away from the site of the hormone production. In the nervous system, the neurotransmitter simply diffuses across the synaptic cleft to get to its target cell. In the endocrine system, the blood will carry the hormone to all cells in the body. Only those cells with receptors for that hormone will be affected by the hormone. So even though the hormone will go past every cell in the body, only certain cells are target cells for each hormone. Endocrine glands are ductless glands as opposed to exocrine glands which have ducts. This means that the secretions from an endocrine gland are released directly into the extracellular fluid and then picked up by the blood and the lymphatic supply. Endocrine glands will have a very rich blood supply and a very rich lymphatic supply so that the hormones can be picked up and carried to the target cells in the blood. Several organs contain endocrine cells. This means that some organs have dual function. They may perform in one system, but they also have an endocrine function. The major glands of the endocrine system are the Pituitary gland, located in the brain, the Thyroid gland, located in the neck, and the Parathyroid glands, which are closely associated with the thyroid gland in the neck. The Adrenal glands sit on top of the kidneys, and the Pineal Gland is located in the brain. These glands only have an endocrine function, no other function, simply an endocrine function. There are some organs that function in another system, but they have a fairly major endocrine function. These include the pancreas, which is part of the digestive system, the gonads, the ovaries in the female and the testes in the male. These are part of the reproductive system, and the hypothalamus, which is a part of the brain. All of these function in their various other systems, but they have a major endocrine function as well. We can classify hormones based on their chemical composition. Some hormones are amino acid based. They may be amino acid derivatives, that is, simply slightly modified amino acids themselves. They may be short chains of amino acids that are called peptides, or they may be full-fledged proteins. The other chemical that makes up hormones is cholesterol. These make up the steroid hormones. Hormones are going to have to affect their target cell, and they're going to alter the metabolism some way. Various ways that hormones alter the metabolism can be to change the membrane permeability to ions. This means that the membrane potential would be changed. In other words, hormones can initiate an action potential on a cell. Hormones can alter the synthesis of proteins. It can cause cells to start making proteins they weren't making before, or to stop making proteins they were making. They can also alter enzyme activity. Now, most of the proteins manufactured in the cell are enzymes, and enzymes control all of the chemical reactions that happen in a cell. So if we alter protein synthesis and start making a protein, think about that as being an enzyme, the cell will now be able to carry on a metabolic process it couldn't before. If we activate an enzyme that was inactive, we will start up a metabolic process that was not active before. The same is true if we stop producing a protein or inactivate an enzyme. We will stop a metabolic process. Hormones can alter the secretory activity of a cell, and they can stimulate mitosis, so they can stimulate growth of cells. There are two major mechanisms for hormones to act on cells. One is called the second messenger system. It relies on a protein in the cell membrane called G protein. All of the amino acid-based hormones act this way with one exception. Direct gene activation is how the steroid hormones all operate. Now, the one exception to a protein hormone is the thyroid hormones, the ones that are involved in metabolism. They are amino acid hormones, but they act by direct gene activation. Let's look at that second messenger mechanism. Amino acid-based hormones cannot get through the cell membrane. So we say the hormone acts as the first messenger. It's going to bind to a receptor on the cell surface. Now, the fact that the cell has a receptor for this hormone means that this cell is a target cell for this hormone. When the hormone binds to this receptor, it activates the G protein that's found in the cell membrane. Then the G protein will activate an enzyme, and that enzyme will activate some molecule inside the cell that actually causes the change in the cellular metabolism. That's the second messenger. Think about ordering something from Amazon.com. It comes UPS. The UPS driver comes to your door, leaves the package, knocks on your door. That is the equivalent of the hormone attaching to its receptor. When you answer the door, you're like the G protein. You bring the box in and you open it up, and now you have that coffee maker you ordered, let's say, and now you can make coffee. So you've changed something you can do in your house as a result of taking in that box. That's kind of how the second messenger pathway works. Let's look at this picture. Here is the receptor for this particular hormone. When the hormone attaches to the receptor, that activates this G protein. In this case, G protein is activating an enzyme called adenylate cyclase. This is going to activate an enzyme called protein kinase, and this will trigger some enzyme being activated. So we will have something go on in the cell that couldn't happen before. So we have the hormone on the receptor, activation of G protein, and then the formation of some molecule inside the cell that acts as a second messenger to change the metabolism of the cell. Direct gene activation is used by steroid hormones. Since steroid hormones are lipids, they are lipid soluble. That means they can diffuse right through the cell membrane and into the cell. So they can basically diffuse into any cell. There has to be a receptor for them, however, for them to activate that cell. And in this case, the receptor is actually in the nucleus. So instead of having a receptor on the cell membrane, we have an intracellular receptor, a receptor inside the cell. When the hormone binds to its receptor, it makes a receptor hormone complex that can bind to DNA. It binds to a specific location on the DNA, and this causes a gene to be produced. We get a new protein, and that new protein is an enzyme. So we will be able to do a metabolic process we couldn't do before because of this enzyme. With second messenger, the steroid hormone can diffuse into the cell and find its intracellular receptor. When we have that complex, that attaches to the DNA, and this will activate protein synthesis, so we get a new protein. The pituitary gland is sometimes referred to as the master gland of the endocrine system, but actually the hypothalamus controls the pituitary. The pituitary can be divided into an anterior pituitary and a posterior pituitary, almost like they're two separate glands. The hypothalamus directly controls the anterior pituitary. It will secrete releasing hormones that will tell the anterior pituitary to manufacture and release certain hormones, or it may secrete inhibiting hormones, which will tell the anterior pituitary to not release certain hormones. All of the hormones of the hypothalamus target the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary hormones are the ones that control all of the other glands in the system. So it's easy to think that the pituitary is boss, but really the hypothalamus is the boss of the pituitary. The hypothalamus also manufactures two neurohormones. Now remember, the difference between a neurotransmitter and a hormone was where they were produced. In this case, the chemical messenger is manufactured by nervous tissue, but it's released into the bloodstream like a hormone, hence the name neurohormone. They're kind of a combination of both. These are stored and released from the posterior pituitary. The hormones of the hypothalamus all target the anterior pituitary, and they're called tropic hormones. Tropic hormones typically stimulate another gland. Thyrotropin-releasing hormone, or TRH, corticotropin-releasing hormone, or CRH, gonadotropin-releasing hormone, or GnRH, prolactin-releasing hormone and prolactin-inhibiting hormone, and growth hormone-releasing hormone. These are all going to tell the anterior pituitary to release hormones that will affect the thyroid gland, the adrenal gland, the gonads, the breast for milk production, or growth hormone for stimulating growth in the body. The hormones of the anterior pituitary gland are going to stimulate other cells in the body, usually other glandular cells. Growth hormone will stimulate cells to divide, particularly the skeletal and muscle cells of the body. So this is going to stimulate overall body growth. Prolactin will target the breasts. It helps maintain milk production. Adrenocorticotropic hormone will regulate the cortex portion of the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland is like the pituitary. There are two parts to it. Thyroid stimulating hormone is going to regulate the growth and activity of the thyroid gland. And the gonadotropic hormones will cause the release of FSH and LH. These are going to target the gonads, making them develop, produce, and release the gamete. The posterior pituitary hormones are actually the stored neurohormones that are made by the hypothalamus. There are two of these. Oxytocin stimulates contractions for labor and causes milk ejection. Antidiuretic hormone inhibits urine production. Urine production is known as diuresis, so antidiuretic hormone is against urine production. It causes the kidneys to reabsorb more water. Alcohol will inhibit antidiuretic hormone, so when people go out and drink a lot, they spend a lot of time in the bathroom because they don't have that antidiuretic hormone having them retain the water they want. This means that they actually dehydrate. Most hangovers are the result of severe dehydration. Some of the homeostatic imbalances of the pituitary gland are due to either undersecretion or oversecretion of some of these hormones. Hypersecretion of growth hormone in children causes a condition known as gigantism. Here, the person grows to be 8 feet tall or taller. They're normally proportioned, they're just exceptionally tall. Hypersecretion of growth hormone in adults can only affect certain bones. There are only a few bones in the body that can be affected by growth hormone after the bone has ossified. These include the bones of the hands and the feet, the jaw, and the frontal bone. This causes a condition known as acromegaly. They have big hands and feet, and they have a misshapen face. Hyposecretion of growth hormone will cause dwarfism. This will be a person who's about 4 feet tall, normally proportioned but just unusually short. If there is a hyposecretion of antidiuretic hormone, we have a condition known as diabetes insipidus. This form of diabetes has nothing to do with sugar. This has to do with water. Here, with antidiuretic hormone being undersecreted, there is excessive urine output, and as a result of all of this water loss, the person is always very thirsty. This can be treated with a nasal spray if it truly is just a hyposecretion of antidiuretic hormone. Then we have the hypersecretion, the syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion. Here the body is secreting ADH whether you need to save water or not. As a result, you save water when you don't need to. That water ends up in your tissues as edema. So you have brain edema and fluid weight gain. Now, people who have this condition usually have it as the result of a tumor that is secreting ADH. If they can find and take out the tumor, then this stops. The thyroid gland secretes two very different kinds of hormones. The thyroid hormone is T3 and T4, triiodothyronine and tetraiodothyronine. These require iodine in order to be made, and these are the hormones that are your metabolism hormones. They stimulate your metabolism. They're important for growth hormone to work properly. They're important for growth to occur. Calcitonin is the other hormone that's produced by the thyroid gland. Calcitonin stimulates osteoblasts. Osteoblasts are the bone building cells. And if you're building bone, you're going to remove calcium from the blood. Calcitonin will decrease blood calcium levels. Calcitonin is primarily used to treat osteoporosis. It appears to be important in growing children, but once you reach adulthood, it plays a minor role. Imbalances of the thyroid gland typically involve the thyroid hormones. Hypothyroidism causes a condition known as myxedema in the adult. There's a decreased metabolism, the people are lethargic, they gain weight very easily, and they get a very dry, coarse, thick kind of skin to them. In children, hypothyroidism causes cretinism. This is a mentally retarded dwarf. Now we can test children for thyroid hormone and treat them appropriately so that this does not occur. Both of these conditions can be treated with artificial thyroid hormone. Goiter occurs when there is an iodine insufficiency. Without enough iodine, you don't make all the T3 and T4 you need to. So your pituitary gland keeps telling your thyroid gland to make hormone. If it can't make hormone, it's going to get larger, it grows. And so you get a rather enlarged swelling on the neck, and this may actually impede swallowing. Most of the time this has to be treated with surgery, and sometimes it causes hypothyroidism so that the patient has to take thyroid hormone afterward. It's important to get a sufficient amount of iodine in your diet. In this country, we get it largely through iodized salt. The other source of iodine is seafood. Another homeostatic imbalance of the thyroid gland is hyperthyroidism. There are several forms of hyperthyroidism, but one of the most common forms is Graves' disease. Graves' disease is an autoimmune disease. Here the immune system makes an antibody that looks just like thyroid stimulating hormone. It stimulates the thyroid gland to make T3 and T4. As a result, you have an increased metabolism. These people are nervous, they have tachycardia, they do lose a lot of weight, and they get bug eyes, something called exophthalmos. Their eyes literally bug out of their head. This is treated by destroying part of the thyroid gland. Sometimes we destroy enough of it that we actually make these people hypothyroid and they have to take thyroid hormone for the rest of their lives. The parathyroid glands produce parathyroid hormone or PTH or parathormone. They're all the same thing. This hormone increases blood calcium levels. It does this by stimulating the osteoclasts to break down bone and release calcium. It will enhance reabsorption of calcium from the urine, and it will enhance the absorption of calcium from the intestine. It's important to maintain appropriate calcium levels in the blood. Calcium is very important for proper muscle contraction, neurotransmitter release, blood clotting, and some other things. If calcium levels get too low, muscle and nerve tissue gets too excitable. These people can get a condition called tetany, where they have all of these muscle spasms occur, and they may even have seizures. You, of course, treat this by giving them some calcium. In general, the hormones made by the adrenal cortex are called the corticosteroids. We have the mineralocorticoids, primarily the hormone aldosterone. These are going to regulate minerals in the blood, primarily sodium and potassium. They target the kidney tubules to either increase sodium loss or sodium reabsorption. The stimulus for this hormone is low sodium or high potassium levels. The glucocorticoids, primarily cortisone, increase blood glucose levels. It also has an anti-inflammatory property. Glucocorticoids are stimulated when you're under stress. And then there are sex hormones, primarily androgens. Androgens are masculinizing hormones. The hormones of the adrenal medulla are the catecholamines. This is epinephrine and norepinephrine. Epinephrine is sometimes called adrenaline, norepinephrine, noradrenaline. These hormones prolong the effects of the neurotransmitters of the sympathetic nervous system. Since norepinephrine is the neurotransmitter of the sympathetic nervous system, here is a different source of norepinephrine. The receptors don't care where the norepinephrine came from, whether it came from a nerve cell or a gland, they're going to respond to it the same way. So this is what allows us to sustain those fight or flight conditions. You'll remember that the sympathetic nervous system increases heart rate, increases blood pressure, and also increases glucose levels. Because there are a number of hormones that are secreted by the adrenal gland, there are a number of homeostatic imbalances that can occur. As we look at hyposecretion of the adrenal cortex hormones, the primary disease is Addison's disease. Here, the mineralocorticoids are not produced in a sufficient supply. As a result, sodium and water are lost through the kidneys, and this leads to dehydration. The dehydration contributes to low blood pressure, and the skin will get a bronze color. This bronzing of the skin is one of the giveaways for this particular disease. Hypersecretion of the adrenal cortex hormones can be something called hyperaldosteronism. Here, the mineralocorticoids are oversecreted. Now we save back too much sodium and too much water. This leads to high blood pressure and to edema. Cushing's syndrome is a hypersecretion of the glucocorticoids. Here we mobilize glucose. We tend to store fat between the shoulder blades, so we say these people get a buffalo hump. They get a moon face because of the edema they get, and they have high blood pressure. Also, because the glucocorticoids depress the immune system, they're highly susceptible to infectious disease. Hypersecretion of the androgens will lead to masculinization. Here you'll have excessive male hormones. This sort of explains the bearded lady at the circus. Hypersecretion of the adrenal medulla hormones would be a hypersecretion of epinephrine and norepinephrine. This means that the body would act like it's under stress even when it's not. So you would have a rapid heartbeat, high blood pressure, perspiring, and irritability. There have been many people who think they're having anxiety attacks when they really have a hypersecretion of the adrenal medulla hormones. One cause of this is a tumor called a pheochromocytoma. Most of them are actually in the adrenal gland, but they can be anywhere in the body. The pancreas is one of those glands with dual function. It functions in the digestive system, making digestive enzymes, but it also has a very strong endocrine function. It produces two hormones. Insulin is stimulated by high levels of glucose. Insulin allows cells to take in glucose. Glucose can then be metabolized to make energy. As blood glucose levels fall, insulin release will stop. Glucagon is the other hormone secreted by the pancreas. This hormone is stimulated when blood glucose levels drop too low. It's the antagonist to insulin. It will reverse the effects of insulin. Insulin takes blood glucose levels down. Glucagon takes them up. Glucagon will target the liver to break down stored glycogen, and that glycogen becomes glucose, which can be released to the bloodstream. Diabetes mellitus is one of the conditions that occurs when the pancreas does not work properly. Here there is either a hyposecretion of insulin or the insulin that's produced is not as active as it should be. This may be the result of the insulin receptors on cells not being effectively able to attach to the insulin. As a result, glucose can't move into the cells. It's in the bloodstream, but it can't get into the cells, so the cells can't make energy from it. The cells are literally starving. They turn to other food sources, primarily fats, to make ATP. When we burn fats, we make something called ketones, and ketones are acidic, so diabetics go into what's called ketoacidosis. This means their blood becomes more acidic, and this leads to some other issues with the way that their body functions. Glucose is spilled in the urine. This is a condition called glycosuria. People with diabetes mellitus show the three polys: polyuria, polydipsia, and polyphagia. Because urine is full of glucose, extra water comes out to keep that glucose in solution. That's polyuria. Polydipsia is excessive thirst. If you're urinating a lot more, then you're going to be thirsty again. And polyphagia is excessive eating. Remember, your cells are starving. You have tons of glucose in your blood, but it's not getting into your cells, so your cells are sending messages to your brain saying, we need to eat. There are basically two types of diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is insulin dependent. This requires insulin injections to keep the insulin levels up. At one time, we saw this primarily in children, so it was sometimes called juvenile onset diabetes, but it's pretty much lost that name now. This is probably an autoimmune disease. The target for the immune system are the insulin-producing cells of the pancreas. When these cells are destroyed, insulin is not produced. This means that we have to supply insulin from another source. This usually does have a fairly early onset. It usually does occur early in life. The longer you deal with diabetes, the more likely you are to have vascular and neural damage. Type 2 diabetes is non-insulin dependent. This used to be called mature onset because we used to see it primarily in adults over the age of 40. We are now seeing it much more frequently in children. Here there's either an insufficient supply of insulin, some is made but not enough, or more likely the receptors on the cells do not attach well to the insulin and so they don't get the full effects of insulin. Usually individuals with this type of diabetes are overweight and can initially control their diabetes with diet and exercise. At some point they typically have to start taking insulin. The pineal gland is found in the roof of the third ventricle. The third ventricle is in the diencephalon, and in particular the epithalamus is the location in the diencephalon of the pineal gland. We don't know very much about this gland, but it does secrete the hormone melatonin, and melatonin seems to set our diurnal rhythm. We know that melatonin levels peak at midnight and are at their lowest at noon. So we believe that the melatonin has something to do with setting our biological clock. For those of you who may have difficulty sleeping, it may be a melatonin problem. Supposedly, we need to have some darkness before we go to sleep. This allows our melatonin levels to come down. This is why people who have trouble sleeping, they tell you don't watch television, don't use your computer for a couple of hours before you try to go to sleep, because that's the light that stimulates your pineal gland to not produce melatonin. The gonads are also organs that have dual function. They produce the gametes, but they also produce some hormones. The ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone. These hormones are involved in the development and maintenance of the female reproductive system and also the development of the secondary sex characteristics in the female, primarily the change in the size of the shape of the pelvic bones and the development of breasts. The testes secrete testosterone. This hormone is involved in the development and maintenance of the male reproductive system and in the development of male secondary sex characteristics. This would involve making heavier muscles, facial hair, deepening of the voice. Now, there are endocrine cells scattered in all kinds of other structures around the body. For example, there are some endocrine cells in your heart. They produce a hormone called atrial natriuretic hormone, and this helps control blood volume. The gastrointestinal tract produces several hormones. These are called enteroendocrines, and they control enzyme secretion involved in digesting food. The kidney even gets into the act. It produces a hormone called erythropoietin, and erythropoietin stimulates the bone marrow to produce red blood cells. Even your skin, it secretes the hormone cholecalciferol. This is the precursor for vitamin D. So we need to think very broadly about the endocrine system. While we have a number of discrete glands that have only an endocrine function, there are a number of other cells scattered throughout the body that are involved in controlling body functions.